Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive.
Hmm.
Today we're going way back to the Middle Ages with this fascinating sermon by Peter Damian
Right.
about the story of St. Hilary
Right.
and the very unusual relocation of his remains.
Yeah, it's
Eh,
definitely not your typical, funeral procession when you've got angels involved.
Exactly. It's not just about like digging up a body and moving it.
Yeah.
It's like this whole big deal with miracles and visions and, the significance of certain burial places.
It really makes you think about how people in the Middle Ages viewed death and remembrance. It's like this whole other.
Oh, yeah, totally. And
Yeah.
speaking of making a scene, Damien just casually mentions that St. Hilary's body was carried by angels. Like, can we just
Yeah.
unpack that for a second?
Yeah.
Was that like a common belief back then that, if you were important enough, you got the angel chauffeur service to the afterlife?
Well, it pops up, here and there throughout history and in religious texts. But it wasn't like an everyday occurrence or anything.
Okay, so it's still a pretty big deal.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
But-
just imagine, the kind of reputation this guy St. Hilary must have had. To have angels literally stepping in as your pallbearers, that's like, getting a 5-star review from the divine.
Right, like you made it to the VIP lounge in the afterlife.
Exactly. And that's exactly what Damien is trying to get across here. He wants us to understand that St. Hilary wasn't just some random holy man. He was the Bishop of Poitiers, a major player in the fight against the Arians, who were basically challenging the whole idea of who Jesus was.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I remember the Aryans. They were kind of a big deal back then.
Huge. They caused a theological ruckus for centuries. So for Damien's audience, Hilary was like a theological rock star.
So basically getting the angel treatment for your funeral was like the medieval equivalent of trending on Twitter.
Pretty much. It's Damien's way of saying, listen up, folks, this guy was the real deal. But then he does something really interesting. He compares Hilary's very public, almost celebratory procession to another famous burial, that of Moses.
Oh, yeah, Moses.
Mm.
Parting the Red Sea, leading the Israelites out of Egypt. Talk about a legacy.
And he got the angel treatment too. But there's a big difference that Damien picks up on.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the twist?
While Hilary's final journey was this massive spectacle, Moses' burial was shrouded in secrecy. In fact, the Bible goes out of its way to say that nobody knows where he's buried.
Really? Huh. So we've got these two major figures, both getting these incredible send-offs, but in totally different styles. One is a parade, the other's a covert opus.
What's Damien getting at with that comparison?
Well, to understand that, we've got to go back to the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that whole golden calf incident?
Oh, yeah.
Where the Israelites are basically worshiping a statue while they're waiting for Moses to come back down the mountain?
Right. Not their finest moment.
To put it mildly.
Well,
So Damien's kind of hinting that they had a bit of a track record when it came to, misplaced devotion.
yeah, you could say that again. It's like they were always one step away from building a shrine to something that wasn't God.
Exactly. So he's worried that if everyone knew where Moses was buried, it wouldn't be long before someone tried to, build another golden calf.
Yeah. Makes sense. It's like God was saying, look, I know you guys mean well, but for everyone's sake, let's just keep this one on the down low.
Right. Like some things are better left unsaid and some tombs are better left unfound. But then Damien takes this whole tomb thing in a totally different direction. He starts talking about tombs as mementos for the living.
That's a fascinating way to look at it.
It is. It's like he's saying these places aren't just about remembering the dead. They're about inspiring the living to live better lives.
It's like a physical reminder of what they stood for and what we should strive for.
Exactly. And to really drive this point home, he points to the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. These are like the biggest names in the book of Genesis.
Founding fathers of the faith.
And they were obsessed with being buried in a very specific place, the Promised Land. Which, when you think about it, is kind of interesting. You'd think these spiritual giants would be a little less concerned about their earthly address and a little more focused on, heaven.
Like, just bury me anywhere, I'll be with God.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what's with the fixation on a particular plot of land?
Well, that's where Damien makes this brilliant connection to Jesus. You see, the patriarchs lived centuries before Jesus was born, but they believed that the Messiah, the Savior, would come from their lineage.
Oh.
So by insisting on being buried in the Promised Land, they weren't just trying to secure a prime piece of real estate in the afterlife. For Damian, it was about connecting their physical remains to the place where Jesus would eventually be born, live, and die.
Wow. So it's like they were making a pilgrimage in death, pointing towards the ultimate destination, Jesus himself.
Exactly. And for Damian, that's what a tomb should be. Not just a place of mourning, but a signpost, pointing us towards a deeper truth.
I like that. A signpost. And speaking of signs, Damian uses this really vivid metaphor to explain this connection between the patriarch's burial place and Jesus.
Oh, yeah. He compares the promised land, often described as flowing with milk and honey, to the dual nature of Jesus, his humanity and his divinity.
Milk and honey, I'm not going to lie, that one kind of threw me for a loop.
Yeah.
So how do milk and honey connect to Jesus? Milk and honey, it's such a vivid image. What's the connection to Jesus?
Well, think about what those things represent. Milk nourishes us, sustains us from the moment we're born. It represents our physical needs, our connection to the earth, to this life. And then you have honey with its sweetness and richness. It's associated with abundance, luxury even. It's seen as this gift from the heavens in many cultures.
I see where you're going with this. So milk represents our humanity and honey.
Exactly. Honey represents the divine, the spiritual nourishment we receive through faith, through our connection to something bigger than ourselves.
So when Damian describes the promised land as flowing with both, he's saying that Jesus embodies both of those aspects, the human and the divine, perfectly balanced in one person.
Exactly. It's such a powerful way of illustrating that core Christian belief that Jesus was both fully God and fully human. And this is where it gets really interesting because Damian isn't just trying to impress us with theological jargon.
Right.
He wants us to ask ourselves, how can we tap into that duality? How can we find that balance of the earthly and the spiritual in our own lives?
So it's not just about understanding this concept intellectually, but actually embodying it, living it out.
Exactly. He wants us to seek out that promised land within ourselves, to cultivate that same richness of spirit, that abundance of grace that he saw in Jesus.
And that's a journey we all take.
It is.
Not through pilgrimages to tombs or holy sites, but through the choices we make every day, the way we choose to live our lives. Wow. We started with angels moving bodies, and we've ended up with this really profound reflection on what it means to live a truly fulfilling life.
It is remarkable, isn't it, how these seemingly simple stories can open up these deeper layers of meaning.
It really is. And on that note, a huge thank you to you for joining us on this fascinating exploration of history, faith, and the power of symbols. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a new text. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and as always, thanks for listening.